Hello and welcome to another instalment of the True Crime Uncut podcast. I'm Hayley Rhodes and I'm joined by Emma Griffiths to talk about a story that even 60 years on is still considered to be one of the most horrific murder cases in British history. Emma, you made the Prime Video series Becoming Ian Brady. Why is this a story that we're still talking about 60 years later?
It was one of the most horrific crimes that I think still to date, I think that I've ever worked on. And I think it had a profound effect on society. So Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in the early 60s lured 5 children, kidnapped them, and then murdered them and disposed of 3 out of the 5 bodies on Saddleworth Moor. 2 of the bodies were in a house that they lived in Manchester. This was all in the early 60s in Manchester. And I just think it's the mugshots. So the mugshot of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley at that time as well, obviously black and white. To me, they're like these visual shorthand of what evil epitomised and still does. I think it's kind of like a benchmark of everything that's preceded that is gauged against on kind of level of evilness, if that's the thing. Manchester in the 1960s, my dad and his brother grew up very close to where the children were abducted from. And I know at that time, children ran freely. You know, it was that people's back doors were never locked. Families, communities, pub on every corner. Life was free, it was simple, and it was perceived as innocent and safe for every generation to go out and live your life. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley come in and they walk those streets, drive through those streets. They spot these innocent children, all under the age of 18, lure them into their cars. And Ian Brady, to me, created the boogeyman that has many parents have used to warn their children from like stranger danger kind of thing on corner streets. And I think they were the first serial killers, I suppose, as well within UK history.
So how much did you actually know of the story before you started working on this?
Because of my dad, so my dad and my uncle lived in Droylsden, which kind of just, it's the kind of Hyde area, Ashton-under-Lyme. Droylsden sits within the east side of Manchester. They grew up there, they were born early 50s, late 40s, so it's that kind of time period. So I think I was told about it when I was younger and I didn't really absorb about it much, but I think I do recall them talking about this man, and then you see the mugshot. And, you know, that puts the fear of God into anybody just seeing those 2 black and white images.
What is it about the mugshots that strikes you so much? Is it the sort of deadness behind the eyes? Is that what it is?
I think it is, yeah. And they're just haunting images. And I think that was our base point for the whole series, really, were those mugshots, because they do feel quite haunting. And our opening title sequence, we tried to create a feeling of a haunting sense, and I think it resonates and carries on throughout the whole 3 parts.
So the Moors murders, it was Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. I think they were both considered to be equally responsible for at least 2 of the murders, and then he was responsible for a third. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Well, it depends. Again, it's kind of we had to, obviously within a documentary we went out and saw as many experts who have read, even written, engaged and had conversations with Ian Brady. And obviously there's kind of some people believe it was all Ian Brady who was the driving force. Others believe she was a real powerhouse behind it as well. What I think actually happened was one needed the other. I don't think Hindley would have killed without Ian Brady, but I think Ian Brady was on a path to killing anyway, but she facilitated him. Myra Hindley was working at an accountancy firm. He comes and joins the company, and it's love at first sight for Hindley. I don't think at least a good few months pass and he's not interested. But anyway, she perseveres and becomes obsessed. And I think if you listen to the experts who have spoken to Hindley as well, it was one of those where all of a sudden he kind of clocked, she's really obsessed with me. What can I do? What can I facilitate with having her on board? And I don't know whether she saw a kindred spirit. Maybe she had something within her and saw part of her in him, and then just the fusion of those two individuals.
So what was it made you want to call it Becoming Ian Brady? Why the focus specifically on him in this programme? I know obviously she comes into it, but why the focus more on him than her?
There had been quite a lot of documentaries about her, because obviously she is the antithesis of what a societal norm of a woman should be. So to look at him, I think, was just a natural progression. And to really, I think as well, it's just like I think it's really important to keep revisiting this, because I think it's this case, because as psychological studies advance, there's more techniques, aren't there, in learning how an individual behaves, their backstory. In order for us to acknowledge and understand why people do behave in certain ways, obviously, it would be very difficult to be able to stop people, but it's a way of understanding. So I think it was just a natural thing that hadn't really been done when you look specifically at him.
So you went right back to the very, very beginnings of his life, so right back to Glasgow in the late 1930s, early 1940s. So what was that like, looking at the kind of history of that period?
It was just, basically, episode 1 is called The Dark Path, and I think most of, we had it in chapters, so our chapter 1, it was mainly archive, because I felt it was really important to establish Glasgow at that time, and to bring a sense of what Ian Brady would have been living socio-economic circumstances there. So Ian Brady wasn't born Ian Brady. He was born Ian Stewart in 1938 in the Gorbals, which was an area of Glasgow I think was very deprived. I think people were living, you'd say kind of apartments, flats now, but I don't know what they would be, like dwellings where you'd have a couple of rooms and probably maybe multiple families living in these small accommodations. And he recounts it, his time in the Gorbals and growing up, very fondly. When he wrote to Peter Gilman when he was in prison, this is much later in his life.
Peter Gilman's a journalist.
Yes, he has very, very fond memories. And apparently he went back and visited annually. He went up there. His mum was a waitress. And his father apparently died before she gave birth, but there's no corroboration. I think a lot of people have learned or tried to research his father's father, but have not come with anything. So that's why the focus has always been on the mum, the fact of abandonment, which I think can contradict itself sometimes, because his mother didn't really abandon him. She couldn't care for him, so she asked a friend, the Sloanes, to take him in, and so he went to as part of a family, and she would visit quite regularly, apparently. So that kind of, I think there is a sense of abandonment that you can understand there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe more of an attachment issue than an abandonment issue. Like
exactly.
That kind of like not knowing when your mum is coming back and whether you have her kind of whole attention.
Yeah. And if you're in a safe and secure environment as well, we don't know obviously what he saw, and I don't know whether there were beatings before. You don't know the kind of environment that he grew up in, but the reality of it, I think it was a tough place to live. But he talks about it very fondly. So yeah, the first chapter was the Gorbals, really, and then he's with the Sloanes, but then the Sloanes can't cope with him, and he goes to a Borstal, and then he comes out, and I think he's encouraged to go to his birth mother, who has moved to Manchester and has a new husband called Brady. Hence, Ian Stewart goes to Ian Brady and transitions and moves to Manchester. So that's where he ends up.
And one of the things that do we know anything about his relationship with Patrick Brady, his stepfather? Because one of the things the graphologist that you interview says is that he was really proud of the Brady name more so than of the name Ian. So do we know why he put that on a bit more of a pedestal?
No, not at all. And there's other accounts where he actually despised. You read that he actually, didn't like his stepfather. So again, there's contradicting reports, really. And that's the interesting thing with Brady. Even though the people that have he've engaged in writing and talking to, that what do you believe is the truth and what's not the truth, because Ian Brady was all about controlling the narrative, controlling individuals.
And presumably that's why he was so happy to reply to the journalists' letters, because he wanted to give his side of the story and make that the record.
Absolutely, and have an audience. He loved that whole audience. So the Sloanes took the family out for a weekend to Loch Lomond, and he went and disappeared and apparently went off. And at this time, he had this has been called as an existential crisis, or whether he just had a realization, this is me, I want to be king of the castle. And he looked down and kind of perceived everyone below as maggots. And I think that's kind of a familiar theme that kind of carried.
So a real kind of superiority complex about the world.
God complex, yeah.
It's interesting that manifests itself in killing children. I can understand sort of narcissism, but that's a weird way for it to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, again, why it's just so complex, and to me, why it's so horrific, because I just think he knew exactly what he was doing. It was all premeditated. Because there's stories of when he was younger, of actually being quite distraught when I think a horse had been injured on the road. I think the Sloanes had a dog and was going to have to be put down, and he got absolutely, got quite distressed at losing these animals.
In terms of who you decided to interview for this, what was your kind of shopping list of people that you wanted to get to tell this story and to analyse this story?
It was obviously Becoming Ian Brady. I think it was important, obviously, to get psychologists involved, but not just any psychologists, ones that actually had a definite interest in the Moors murders, Ian Brady, Myra Hindley. And then we just reached out to anyone, obviously top of the list, anyone who'd had any contact with Ian Brady, had done research, had written papers. We reached out, and I think we got quite a good comprehensive cast. And we also got the senior investigating officer, Jeff Nupfer, involved as well. So, I think the cast was great and gave differing opinions, I think. And that's one thing that I think we'll never truly know. And even if Ian Brady was still alive today, we still wouldn't know, because you could not believe everything or anything that came out of his mouth anyway. So it's up to the experts in order, I suppose, to decipher, and through their expertise, like Emma Bache as well, who was doing the handwriting, to try and build up this picture of who Ian Brady was.
So Myra Hindley and Ian Brady met at work. She was besotted with him. He was not interested at first, perhaps until he realised that there was something malleable or something that maybe he could work with there. We don't really know what his thinking was, but how did their relationship develop from presumably going on dates or having, I think they talked about one-night stands, sort of a set of one-night stands. How did their relationship develop from that to the point where they were killing people together? What was that trajectory like?
Well, if you take it from the beginning, because apparently, Myra Hindley, even though she had had boyfriends and, was probably more romantically mature, she was still quite innocent, where it's rumoured and alleged that he might have had homosexual relationships before meeting Myra, but she was his first heterosexual relationship. And then I think it's kind of like, just as you kind of say, I think he discovered someone hugely malleable, and I suppose it would be coercive control now, I don't know, but it was that kind of pushing boundaries of like, because I think he was they was taking pornographic photographs. So I think him taking her down this quite dark path and morphing into something that he wanted or knew that would be his partner in
and perhaps
crime.
she in turn discovered there's something she liked about all of that too.
Exactly, yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, with her obsession with him, that's the thing. I don't know whether there was just something in there that sparked something that was lying dormant, and then it was like it came to the surface. And then I think Ian Brady just brought it up, maybe when they were up Saddleworth, because they used to go to Saddleworth, they'd take photographs, some pornographic, maybe some lovely, you know, squirrel up a tree, and they'd drink wine. They like to drink, smoke, have fun, take photos. He's quite often, or has been photographed with a camera. And then I think he suggested to her, if you could kill anybody, who would it, you know, would you be up for it, and who would it be? And she went, oh yeah, and she named an ex-boyfriend. And I think actually Brady went and kind of stalked him. Like, I don't know whether he was toying around, but yeah, and then I can't actually answer how they like decide, because I don't think it's actually known how they just decided, like, let's just go and abduct a child.
So over what period of time? They were caught after the 5th murder, we think. But so over what period of time were these killings occurring, and what did the parents think had happened to their children during that time?
They were just missing. They were just missing children. And it wasn't until the murder of Edward Evans, who was 17, that they got caught, when David Smith. I think Brady, again, pushing boundaries, that's what it was. And I think you see that within, you know, with the Pauline, Keith, and then Leslie Ann, they were just always pushing boundaries of what can we do next, what can we do next. And I think
sort of escalating the crimes, like getting a little worse each time.
Absolutely. And that's what chapter 2 was called. It was escalation and elation, because they would celebrate all of these murders. They would go back, they would keep souvenirs, take photographs, whatever. This was also, there was a lot of things found subsequently after they were arrested. Suitcase at Piccadilly Station, and it had little notes or stuff that would connect them to the missing children. So then, obviously, yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? Even these people that think they're incredibly clever do these things because of their compulsion, do these things that end up giving them away.
Exactly. And I think that with David Smith, I think he was grooming him. I think he wanted to involve him so they could maybe potentially do bigger and better crimes, and he had charmed him and groomed him. It was even rumoured that they were having a homosexual relationship. But anyway, it was David Smith who was a witness to the murder of Edward Evans. He obviously couldn't live with what he had seen, and he went home and...
So he was married to Myra Hindley's sister?
Yes.
Okay, and he went home and told her that night?
He just couldn't keep it in, and they went out and they called the police, and then the police turned up at the house.
Wow. So if they hadn't have taken that step of trying to recruit David Smith, perhaps this would have gone on for far longer.
Absolutely, yeah. They would
terrifying.
Have kept going, and
One of the things you look in the first episode in quite a lot of detail about his childhood, you talk about abandonment and attachment and poverty. And one of the things that that I've sort of seen people, you know, aficionados of this case writing about online is saying that if you dive into his background and you talk about all of these traumas, that you're almost excusing the things that he went on to do. So where do you kind of stand on that? Can you see that perspective?
Yeah, totally. But we're definitely not excusing. You're trying to explain and look at factors that could have had an impact on him and led him. But I kind of also think that, you know, if people do talk about abandonment, if you take the word literally, he wasn't really abandoned. He was given to a family friend to look after them. There's a lot of things that I think are negated, and I just think the one thing, though, and I think the psychologists lean on, is the socio-economic. I think poverty, lack of food can physically affect you, mentally, physically, and the environment you were in. And we don't know what abuse that he might have experienced in the Gorbals, because we know it was a tough environment to be in. So yeah, but then there's epigenetics, isn't there? We don't know what was going on with his mum, if she was beaten, and what happens with epigenetics is if there's an increase in a stress hormone like cortisol in the mother. That increases the stress hormone through the umbilical cord to the child, and it lowers their threshold of tolerance. So that, again, could have had an impact on him. So going back to your question, though, it's not excusing him at all. It purely is trying to understand the impact of his environment on him physically, mentally, and seeing the progression of... Oh, yeah, just thinking of what he does, it just turns my stomach. It really does.
Yeah, I actually don't know many of the details, and that's very deliberate. I don't think I want to know.
Yeah, and I think you've watched it, haven't you? I just think, I think, do you feel we got the balance right?
I do, actually, yeah. And that, I'm assuming that was a deliberate choice, because you obviously do know all of the details, or as many as there are to be known. And it was obviously a very deliberate choice to not share all of those with viewers, and to actually pick and choose and just keep things at quite surface level. Like, we know that they were sexually motivated crimes. We know that they didn't just kill them straight away. They abducted them, and there was some mistreatment before they murdered them. But you obviously made a conscious decision not to go into the details of that.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's not necessary, because, again, it was just one of those where I think lots of psychologists have tried to work out whether there was an element of paedophilia, or whether it was just they were an easy target because they were children. Again, we go back to Ian Brady and the sense of control that he wanted. He had the control over Myra. Children, these innocent children who were there, picked up to go and help them retrieve this glove, or coming to help with some boxes.
From your own perspective, as a parent and just as a human being with, human decency, how did it impact you working on something and knowing all the details of this case?
Well, initially, I get a huge sense of sadness, because society will never be the same due to those two individuals. And I just love that sense of innocence that there was back in the 60s of children out playing. I can hear that in my head now, like with the archive that we were using and seeing children, I feel that's really sad that we've lost that. His image, I still have issues with getting out of my head. And also, as a parent, I suppose I think that was probably another self-preservation factor of skimming on the details. We literally only focused in on the details that were related to his psyche, rather than just any kind of it wouldn't have been gratuitous, but just any needless telling of the crime, because it's really easy, as you'll know as a crime producer, for those images of those children to start morphing into seeing your own children. So it's tough. And then also with knowing that my dad and his brother grew up, and my uncle definitely could have been, walking those streets. When we went back there and we were filming, it was really eerie to know my grandfather had worked around the corner, and those two predators were walking the streets.
The same streets.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is terrifying. And actually, they do, in the mugshots, they have become notorious, and they do look somewhat dead behind the eyes when you look at them. But actually, they probably just blended into society, and actually people wouldn't have realised the kind of evil that was literally moving amongst them.
Yeah, but that's in so many cases of serial killers, and that's why they get away for it so long. And obviously, Saddleworth Moor back in those days was much quieter than what it is now. They would have just carried on, moving through without anyone noticing or thinking, and also just that innocent, people just wouldn't think of that happening either. So I just think it's one of the most horrific cases I've ever covered.
You've got all these different experts in the programme giving their kind of hypotheses about why he kind of followed this trajectory, why he became this person, why he carried out these horrific crimes. Did you come to any conclusion yourself after kind of hearing all of those opinions and seeing all of this evidence?
He was always going to kill in some capacity. I think it's one of those where it could have been, I think is a great example of nature and nurture. But this is extra special because there's like that added extra element of the Hindley factor kind of thing. And I think that, again, the thing that makes it even worse is that he had empathy, he had emotional empathy. He knew exactly what he was doing. Psychiatrists went and assessed him, and he definitely wasn't ill before he went inside. Once incarcerated, he could have, he definitely did start showing signs of mental illness. So this was a sane man who maybe had a slightly different wiring of the brain, but just wanted to go out there and cause harm and pain and actually bathe in it and enjoy it. And that,
yeah, because you have to have empathy to be able to actually appreciate what you're doing to somebody else. So he must have had that level of empathy.
Yeah, and emotional intelligence, and just makes it even more heinous and egregious, doesn't it? It just like how someone, and I think again, it's just like still, I look at his image and I can remember like when I first started out on it, I was, when you just look and look into someone's eyes, just like how, why? And I suppose we won't ever get a finite, definitive answer, but we've tried to chip away and get an eclectic mix of what different people who are educated and have looked into it, have to contribute. But because it's a shame, really, that because it is so historic and because psychological testing is advancing so quickly, but like a lot of people have passed now, like.
I wanted to ask you about that with regard to, so you had some archive clips of victims' family members in there, but presumably there's not that many people still around to tell those stories of the victims, so that must have been really difficult not to have had that kind of present day voice to represent them. Yeah,
exactly, hence why we tried to insert some of the archive. I think it's just Alan Bennett, Keith's brother, who's still alive now. Keith Bennett, though, is the one body that's still not been found, and that, it's just till his dying day, everything was about control. He was just like, well, I just can I die if I give you this information, etc. He was always trying to control the narrative and control himself, and I just think that's the harshest, the most cruelest thing to do when you know that you're on your deathbed and you still can't give an element of peace, especially as we've just discussed. He has that empathy and emotional intelligence. He knew exactly the pain that he was like digging in, even more so into that family. And then that was a whole thing as well, I think, in the final episode, to just not acknowledge, well, we did acknowledge his death, but it was just silent, quiet. And then he'd gone, and then straight away we went to acknowledge the 5 victims, because again, it's always about the victims. And you do these kind of series when you're looking into the psychology of a serial killer. Why, how, to help us understand for future cases, I suppose.
So after they were both convicted of multiple murders, they were sent to separate prisons, obviously. They did try to maintain their relationship for a little while. How did that go?
Yeah, it did. They did try and continue it for a while, because I do genuinely think Brady actually did care for Hindley. Whether that developed over time, or it was one of those where she can facilitate something and actually, well, I quite fancy her as well, I don't know. But yeah, they had a relationship, and I think they even tried to arrange conjugal visits, potentially get married.
Optimistic.
Yes, very optimistic. These 2 serial killers. But yeah, nothing came of that. And I think it was more Hindley started backing off, and Brady, didn't like that very much and tried to control things. I think he did start talking to the newspapers then and releasing certain articles. But I remember Jeff Knupfer always said that Hindley was very helpful with regards to telling them, the investigators, anything, because they had Leslie Ann Downey's body to find, and obviously Keith Bennett's, and he genuinely feels she did everything she could.
So that's interesting. So she was fully under his spell to the extent that she was happy to kill with him, and then after a period of time being separated from him, it was like the spell was broken, and that maybe she came to her senses to a certain extent, maybe started to have regrets.
Yeah, cutting the umbilical cord, isn't it, of where they're feeding off each other, I suppose.
It doesn't feel like that's a point he ever got to.
No.
So I think there's a feeling that any of his efforts to help were kind of in self-interest. They were to keep the spotlight on him.
Totally, yeah, because Hindley went to the moor to help, obviously, Jeff with the investigation up on Saddleworth Moor, and then as soon as Brady got wind of that, he was then also offering. And I think the police used it a bit to try and get Brady engaged.
Yeah.
In order to show them. But I think at that stage, and again, I think Jeff Knupfer also says that Brady went up there and was saying, oh, it's over here. He seemed and came across as quite confused. But whether, again, he was just playing and, you know, he had all the world's media focused on him again. He was back in control. Whether that was an element or genuinely, because he did become mentally ill in hospital, whether he just genuinely didn't remember. Because I think Brady was saying, oh, things have changed.
Yes,
but
which the moors hadn't really changed at all.
No, exactly. Yeah, so
he had his narrative about what had happened. Did Myra Hindley have a differing narrative about what had happened or why?
But I think there was a hard side to her, and I know it's that whole kind of working class, hard kind of like you go and solve your own problems.
We talked about this though, didn't we? Because I said that when her dad pushed her out the front door and said, go and beat up this boy that's attacked you, I said, well, that's what their parents used to do to them. If they came in crying because someone had hit them, they'd get shoved back out the front door and told to go and hit them back. Yeah. Otherwise your problems didn't get sorted.
Exactly.
But it's interesting because you can have a similarly hard-bitten sort of childhood and not turn out like Myra Hindley. So that's where the whole kind of combination of factors comes together.
Absolutely. And that is what's so fascinating because, yeah, people that, like from the Gorbals, like how many thousands of people were living there. And then, you know, the bad eggs that come out were just a minority. Yeah. So it's just, what are the ingredients that create that evil individual?
And that is what's so fascinating.
Yeah, because he is, to me, the epitome of evil, because he knew exactly what he was doing.
So he died finally, is it 2013? He ended up dying in prison, having served nearly 50 years. Did that kind of draw a line under people's fears of this bogeyman, or did that, you know, that shadow that they'd cast, did that continue? That shadow looms, doesn't it, I think we still talk about it now, and I think society's been changed ever since and will never go back to that sweet and innocent kind of environment that once was. Even though these people are literally one in a billion, maybe, these kind of complete monsters. Yeah. But yeah, you just don't want your child to be the one that comes across them in the street. No, and we do have to remember that actually most people are so true, so good, and you should be able to go and ask for help, and you should be able to go and offer some help if someone asks you. But, you know, as you depicted so well, like that shadow is looming, and what would we do if something did happen to one of our children? And I know. Whenever they go out to play and I say, what do you do if a stranger comes? And my son goes, what if they've got puppies and sweets? And I say, no, still no. But that's, and they might have had sweets. Who knew that what Brady and Hindley, they might have given them sweets as well. But yeah, sadly, life in the UK was never the same again. So having properly deep dived into Brady and his life and his crimes, did your perception of him change at all? Yeah, he was worse. Oh, really? More than a psychopath. He made his own decisions when I knew that he actually knew what he was doing, and he created, basically, to me anyway, a new level
of evil, and I can still feel it in the pit of my gut now when I think about him. My stomach is angry. I don't like him.
I guess the thing is, you could never really understand what motivates someone like Ian Brady, because he's so much beyond the ordinary. His actions are so much beyond what ordinary people can comprehend. But it is really interesting to try to understand him and to kind of try and spot these people coming in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Emma, for joining me today. And we will see you next time for more True Crime Uncut.